And so here we are, ladies and gentlemen. We've stepped out on the world stage. We have few friends at best. And into this, we're going to throw a horrible, horrible specter of anarchy. Now, that is one thing, generally speaking, that people try to avoid. Humanity does not like anarchy. When there is chaos in the streets, even intelligent people, as part of a democracy, will go through and they will vote for whoever can promise to end the anarchy. If you don't believe that, look back to about 1933 in Germany. With everything that was going on in the streets then, they went with the Nazi Party. People in desperate situations oftentimes don't make good choices. And so we're going to talk about anarchy for a little bit. Now, this was one of the things that was genuinely feared by this new government. Okay, under the Articles of Confederation, there was always this concern that there would be a loss of control. And by control, we're not talking about, the government running every aspect of your life or anything like that, but just the simple act of being able to go outside your home, to go to the store, to buy food or something like that without the risk of being attacked, that you are fairly secure in your home, that basically trying to make sure that the purge doesn't happen. That kind of anarchy is what we're trying to avoid. Now, under the Confederation Congress, states were refusing to pay any kind of taxes because the Articles of Confederation did not give the federal government the ability to actually tax. Now, they could turn to the states quite literally and just say, hey, could you please give us some money? But you know as well as I, if somebody asks to borrow money from you, you have two choices. You can say yes or you can say no. And the states, more often than not, were saying no. There was no reason for them to actually go through and pay anything to the government. There was no threat hanging over them of jail time or anything like that. So states were refusing to pay taxes. The national debt was mounting. Now, you can look today and you can see that our national debt currently stands at about $26 trillion, a number that was beyond belief not even that long ago. But we have, at this point in time, a growing national debt. Okay? Our credibility was slipping around the world. We were not seen as a good credit risk. And so as such, even those nations that would loan us money, or those banks that would loan us money, were requesting and demanding, really, an even greater interest rate. So it was a problem growing. It was a snowball rolling downhill. Not only that, but here within the nation itself, boundary disputes started to erupt in small battles between the states. You're starting to have the military, the militia, whatever phrase you would like to use, of one state starting to shoot at the military and whatnot of another state. We were legitimately facing the possibility of civil war this early into the Republic. Plus, maybe Britain was right. Maybe we were going to fracture into 13 separate little warring nations, which Britain would then be able to start picking back up the pieces. Okay, states were also taxing goods from other states. Okay, interstate commerce is when you buy or sell something and it crosses a state line. You make something in California. Okay, you build a product, you only sell it within the boundaries of California. That is called intrastate commerce. If you build that product in California, though, and you're selling it to Arizona or Nevada or Oregon, basically that becomes interstate commerce. And what was happening is the one state would make a product, they would try to sell it in another state, well, that other state would then put some kind of an import duty on it, making it more expensive. So you're seeing difficulties erupting in the economy at this point in time, which was already not in the world's best shape. But you're starting to see more and more issues start to pile upon one another. And there is this fear that, yes, we as a nation just starting out, well, we may almost be finished already. And just like with so many major events throughout human history, all it would take would be one spark. All that was needed was one issue, one incident to happen, and everything could go up in flames. And we pretty much had that with something referred to as Shays' Rebellion. Okay, this is Western Massachusetts. It's 1786. Now, Daniel Shays, for whom this is named, was a Revolutionary War captain. And he was facing a problem that was not uncommon in Massachusetts at this time. Okay, there had been a depression had begun. Now, a depression is a economic term with certain official definitions and whatnot, but essentially what was going on was the economy tanked. It went downhill badly, and you're going to see problems with people losing their homes. They can't pay the mortgage, okay? And as a result, they're losing everything that they had. And I said it before, people who are in a desperate situation do have a tendency to not make good choices. We can all, pretty much, I would argue, we can all say that, when we have been in a bad situation or we have been angry or something like that, we have not stopped to think things through and will grab at the first thing we think is going to make the situation better. Okay? Now, Shays was disgruntled, is the nicest way to put it, over farmland mortgages. Okay? Now, the problem here was the inability to get land, basically. This is the same motivation now as it was back in Bacon's Rebellion in 1676. Okay, desire for land was the motivator for the Paxton Boys in Pennsylvania in 1764. A lot of stuff is going to revolve around land. Now, there were those who could get mortgages, but with the economy tanking, they're not going to have the money to actually pay this back. So, while Shays' Rebellion is one particular incident that is going to really start a ball rolling, it's not the first time we've seen this, okay? A lot of times, this desire for land and a lot of times this desire to get land quick, cheap, and easily is going to lead to some difficulties further on down the road. And that's what's going to happen here. It's really all about mortgages and economics. And you're going to find out that a great number of events in human history actually have some kind of tie-in back to an economic cause of one type. So what happens here is that Daniel Shays and a group of other farmers decide that the best way they can fix this problem, close the courts. If the courts are not open, if the courts cannot process the eviction paperwork and things like that, nobody's going to lose their farm. Yay! Everybody's happy. And so when I say close the courts, they're going to do so in an armed rebellion. Okay, they're going to take up arms to close the court. And we're not just talking about, muskets and rifles and things like that. No, in this case, you're talking in some instances actual artillery, cannons. And they figured that, we'll do this and it'll all work out. Not thinking that it's not so much the building that is required, but it's the actual, workings of the government. So Massachusetts goes into a panic because they don't have the ability to stand up to this. They're really up against a very tough situation. So what do? They call for help from the federal government. Well, the federal government is barely able to help. Now, eventually, they are able to put Shays' Rebellion down, not without the loss of life, unfortunately. I believe it was 3 of Shays' men were killed as a result. Shays himself is now a wanted man. The Commonwealth of Massachusetts wants Shays hanged. They want him executed for this. He is later convicted, he is captured, but he is pardoned. They do not execute him. Cooler heads are going to prevail at long last. But the problem is that this had occurred. And the fear of violence like this lived on. Okay, paranoia became a great motivating factor. Okay, people had a desire that we needed to increase the strength of the federal government, if only to make sure that in the event of something like this ever happening again, that we wouldn't, have to fear that all was going to be lost. Because if this can happen in Massachusetts, it could happen anywhere. They well and truly knew this, and they were afraid. Okay, think about it. It's 1786. We have barely been a nation at this point in time. We don't have friends. We don't have good credit. Things are starting to spiral out of control. And the question is, what can we do? We don't have a government strong enough to actually protect ourselves from ourselves here at home, let alone from any of these other nations around the world. People were beginning to doubt republicanism. They were beginning to doubt that this concept of a democratic republic that we were hoping to have and go forward, that this confederation, there was this fear that it would not survive. People began to doubt the Articles of Confederation. They began to think that this was not sufficient. Maybe they did need a stronger president of some kind. Maybe they did need maybe even a king. Despite their great fear that all of this would lead back to tyranny, like they had just fought against, people were afraid. And you have to figure out which was the greater fear. Was it worse to have a potentially despotic king or some kind of tyrant ruling over the nation, but you were safe from physical harm? Or was it better to have a weak government that could not rule over you with, into every aspect of your life, but there could be shootings in the streets? Where do you find the balance? So a lot of people thought that maybe we can get away with just strengthening the Articles of Confederation. Maybe that's all it's going to take. We can go through, we could tweak the articles, we could change some stuff here, maybe add some things. And so this was the hope. The hope was that we could go through, that we could look at the Articles of Confederation, we could look at what had been happening in the real world, and we could figure out a way to fix things. Now, there is, however, a little bit of a problem with that. As we've mentioned before, the Articles of Confederation, if you wanted to change them, you had to get all 13 states to agree to the change. It wasn't that you needed a majority or even a supermajority of, like, say, 2/3 or 3/4. You had to have 100% of the states would all agree to any change to the articles. So you do have this fear of anarchy in the streets. Now, this is not to say that all was bad, however. Okay, while you do have all of this going on, and you do start to have people thinking, hey, maybe we ought to, to tweak this a little bit to make improvements going on, okay? We were beginning to see some prosperity that was beginning to emerge. So the theory is a rising tide lifts all boats. Maybe if the economy picks up and gets better, then we won't have to worry so much, okay? Congress was actually beginning to have some control in regards to commerce. Okay, that is a huge step forward. Now the problem is, though, remember, we are set up as a confederation where the states will interpret each law passed by the federal government in their own way. So there's going to be no real consistency in that. Plus, we're starting to see our overseas shipping ability regain its place in the world. So we are growing, we are improving in certain areas. But are those improvements sufficient given the panic that set in with Shays' rebellion? What are we as a nation going to do? Can we fix the articles? Maybe. But we have to try and figure something out, and the hope is that we'll be able to do it really bad.